coronavirus pandemic swept almost the entire territory of planet Earth in 2020. Covid-19 divided the human life literally to before and after. What's happening now in different countries of the world? Did we manage to adapt to the new reality? What's the world like during quarantine? All this in the program Stop COVID. Paris, as you've never seen it before. The feelings are a little strange, as if after the apocalypse. In Brussels, schools work as they did before. They bring babies with a runny nose, a cough, and even a minimum temperature. In South Korea, the second wave of coronavirus came earlier than it was expected by the experts.
Major clusters were discovered at churches and mass gatherings, peaking at 441 cases per one day at the end of August.
How do the governments of these countries fight the pandemic, and how do ordinary people experience it? The second wave through the eyes of our reporters and local residents in the new episode of the Stop COVID program. We are now in Paris on the Champs-Élysées. If you have ever been to the city or seen it on TV, then you know that the main avenue of the French capital has never been as deserted as it is now. Well, perhaps only as it looked in the midst of the first wave of the pandemic. Today, France is experiencing a second wave of COVID-19. Wearing masks on the street is a must, and I will now tell you how it feels to be away from home. France was the first in Europe to experience the blow from COVID-19. On January 24, 2020, the country announced 3 cases of infection with the new type of coronavirus. Later, it will be revealed that the very first case of infection was in Paris, probably back in December of 2019. And what's interesting, this person had not visited Wuhan. By the beginning of March, there were already more than 100 registered cases in France, and by mid-October, over 700,000. More than 32,000 of which were fatal. Paris, like most large cities in the country, is included in the zone of the so-called critical morbidity. This means that much more serious restrictions are in force on this territory. So by the decision of local authorities, the work of bars is completely prohibited. Only cafes and restaurants are allowed to work. You see, behind me is an empty terrace. In case of the Champs-Élysées, the spectacle is truly unprecedented. In addition to bars, disco clubs, game and exhibition centers, gyms are closed. State swimming pools and sports complexes are also closed for the general public, but continue to work for school children. By the way, an interesting strategy has been adopted for children in France. The country's authorities have adopted a study that suggests that children under the age of 11 are not active carriers of the virus. Therefore, children continue to attend kindergartens, schools, and are not required to wear masks on the streets. In case of contact with infected person, they are not required to isolate. And the attitude towards younger people is quite different here. Here, they are considered an active carrier of coronavirus infection. Therefore, all youth student parties have been cancelled, and at best, young people can go to the university every other day. Agirim Setabaldina is a third-year student at a Parisian university. Her educational institution was even less fortunate. Her classes didn't even start in the new coronavirus conditions this fall. We didn't even have a chance to start our studies yet, since the teachers are on strike. Not all teachers have computers, and not all teachers are computer literate in order to teach online. So young teachers adapted very quickly, whereas, unfortunately, our professors who are over 60, to be honest, didn't. We mainly have psychologists, psychoanalysts, scientists. They are all over 60. And accordingly, in order not to endanger their lives, we, of course, were asked to stay at home. But studying at home, honestly, it's not studying at all. Our everyday life, of course, especially its social part, changed dramatically. Meetings with friends, meetings in bars, get-togethers, book clubs, the life of association in which I participate is not the same. We no longer meet as we used to. During the quarantine, I bought myself a used bicycle to somehow entertain myself and at least have some activity. Of course, my bicycle rides became longer. If you just want to drink coffee, then on the Champs-Élysées will most likely look like this. You'll have coffee to go and drink it on the bench, since in order to stay inside the cafe, you have to order food. On the other hand, it's a perfect reason to take off the mask. The mask can be removed on the street only in some cases, when you sit down on the bench to eat a drink, when you are jogging, when you ride a bike or a scooter, or when you get into your own car. In all other cases, you must wear a mask. France is probably the only country where the official isolation period due to coronavirus infection has been reduced to 7 days. And here, the authorities also refer to the findings of scientists who found that the greatest probability of infection occurs in the first week after contact. All cases of infection are investigated by agents of the state social service. They call the established contact persons, ask them to isolate, and take the test within a few days. Isolation time is considered as a paid sick leave. Every week, France tests more than 1 million people for coronavirus infection. The tests are free, but it's not that simple. Laboratories are overwhelmed. And you can sign up for them at least 2 weeks before submitting the test. Therefore, it would be more accurate to come and take the test on a first-come, first-served basis. Although, this will take several hours. The results are usually ready within 3 days. Means of protection have firmly entered the life of Parisians. It's simply impossible to leave the house without a mask. And you can disinfect your hands not just at the entrance to the store, but also right on the street, practically in the whole city. The famous French art de vivre is forced to take on more closed forms. The National Science Council predicts that the coronavirus situation will not change until next summer. This means that we won't return to normal life for quite some time. The new reality is to be required to quarantine at home after dinner at a restaurant, as it happened with Artem Ablenko from Antwerp, Belgium. Here, as in most other European cities, there is a strict system of visiting catering places.
Ввели систему трейсинга, контроля потока клиентов.
They have a tracing system. It controls the flow of restaurant customers. You need to go to a special website to register. You enter your name, last name, address, phone number, and email. And if suddenly one of the customers get infected with a coronavirus and it's confirmed, everyone who was at that time at the restaurant receive a text message or email from a volunteer social group. I received such a text message on Saturday, and on that Sunday I had to go to take the test and naturally be quarantined at home for 14 days.
В фламандском парламенте, бельгийском парламенте работают. И такую смс-ку я получил в субботу. Пришлось идти в воскресенье сдавать тесты и, естественно, закрыться дома на карантин 14 дней.
The first case of COVID-19 infection in Belgium was reported on February 4th, 2020. In the midst of the first wave of the pandemic, by mid-April, the largest daily increase was over 2,300 people. During the second wave, by mid-October, the anti-record was broken almost threefold, over 6,500 new cases in the country per day.
Для такой маленькой страны, как Бельгия, это очень много. Брюссельские госпитали переполнены. Сейчас как-то распределяют количество.
For a small country like Belgium, that's a lot. Brussels hospitals are overcrowded. Now they somehow distributed patients according to the number of cases in different hospitals around the country, because there are no more places in the main buildings. Antwerp is one of the few cities in Europe that introduced a curfew, in my opinion. It was the second city after Madrid. After 11 p.m., everyone had to be at home. All restaurants, cafes, shops, and the like were closed, and police were patrolling all areas. For breaking the rules, there was a fine of 250 euros. Now there is no curfew. Everything closes at 1 in the morning, whatever it is. Hotels, restaurants, cafes, bars, and the like. You have a chance to disinfect your hands everywhere as soon as you enter, and you must wear a mask. Visiting elderly people in nursing homes is prohibited. It's allowed only for close relatives.
Посещение пожилых людей в домах престарелых запрещено только близким родственникам.
And what about the younger generation of Belgians? Irina Popova from Brussels continues to take her children to elementary school. After the spring lockdown, amid the second wave of coronavirus, they decided not to close educational institutions in the country. I would like to note that in Belgium there is a completely different attitude towards common colds. They bring babies with a runny nose and cough, and even with a minimum temperature of 37, because here it's not considered as a high fever. In connection with the COVID, these rules have now changed, no additional information is required, specifically in our school, and all children continue to study in the same mode. Also, 2 weeks ago at school, this is also the kindergarten where my children go, a case of coronavirus infection was found. However, the school was not quarantined, although it was known to parents that the infected person was working in after-school center. As I already mentioned, the school was not closed for quarantine, but after-school center was cancelled for 2 weeks. This means that all parents picked up their children at 3:15 p.m. and not an hour later. In addition, the entire teaching staff was changed. Parents were not given any detail, but we assume that teachers were tested. However, no new cases of infection were detected. As for precautions, all students over 12 years old are required to wear a mask in class. Teachers also wear masks all day. In some schools, children study with open windows, but their parents are outraged. The rooms are getting too cold. In addition, some schools and kindergartens made additional entrances and exits and restricted the entry of unauthorized people into the premises. For example, the kindergarten where I take my children limit the entrance for parents. Now we say goodbye at the school gate. In South Korea, the statistics of the second wave of coronavirus looks, on the contrary, more positive than the first one. In February 2020, the country was on the front pages of the world's media as the largest hotbed of COVID-19, second only to China. At the beginning of March, there were almost 4,000 cases. The increase then reached 813 registered cases per day. Today, South Korea seems to have managed to get the virus under control.
The much anticipated and feared second wave of COVID-19 in South Korea had arrived earlier than expected by experts. Major clusters were discovered at churches and mass gatherings. Peaking at 441 cases per 1 day at the end of August, municipal authorities at Seoul metropolitan area and third largest city, INCHEON, enforced COVID-19 level 2.5 social distancing measures. Nightclubs have been closed. Restaurants were open until 8 to 9 p.m. Schools had to limit numbers of students. Sports matches have been canceled.
South Korea is an export-oriented 12th largest world economy, heavily dependent on export. It couldn't afford to impose strict travel or trade restrictions that could possibly affect its economy or impact diplomatic ties. To this day, since the beginning of the outbreak, there have been no quarantines introduced except for massively hit areas, for instance the city of Daegu in February, about 230 kilometers south of Seoul. The authorities had feared that the second wave could further deteriorate the economic situation in the country and the numbers of infected would skyrocket. However, by the end of September, the numbers hit double digits and most restrictions were lifted.
I feel like there was no panic among Korean citizens simply because they were already prepared from the last outbreak. The government wanted to put the country under quarantine, but it didn't happen because I think it was not necessary. However, there were new rules that were added. I know that there is a fine if you do not wear a mask. Overall, I guess Korea has everything under control, and I hope the virus go away quickly.
The second wave had sparked late summer due to increased traveling and constant use of air conditioning in poorly ventilated facilities. However, during the Chuseok, one of the major Korean holidays, when Koreans travel to their parents' homes, most people stayed at home or preferred to drive rather than taking public transportation. There have been no significant changes in our family due to the coronavirus. However, we began to go out less often, we began to meet less people with whom we planned to meet. Be that as it may, the emergence of the coronavirus, although it has become a social problem, affected negatively personal life too. To be honest, it's not even possible to congratulate someone with either admission or graduation. It's not possible to meet friends or just have a nice chat. Well, life itself has changed a lot.
많이 변화가 됐죠.
The majority of the population wear masks in public transportation and in the streets. The only exception are restaurants. Sanitizers are installed in all restaurants, public places, parks, elevators, and bus stops.
1 month later, since the second wave started in South Korea, life seems to be back to normal. Restaurants once again are working regular hours, nightclubs are open, people may return to their usual routines. However, this time around, a mask has become an undeniable people's daily attribute no one questions or doubts in South Korea. Dmitry Lee, South Korea.
The pandemic has changed our habits, lifestyle, and rhythm of life, closed borders, and forced us to distance from each other. And at the same time, it united the whole world. Live in the era of COVID, watch new reports from different countries in our next episodes.